Hi, this is Eric at Try Audio. Today we're going to compare three vintage receivers from the 1970s. We'll compare their looks, their features, and most importantly, how they sound. Today's receivers are all a little higher wattage than normal, and we have one brand we've never looked at before. So today's receivers are the 55-watt Luxman R-1050, the 60-watt Sony STR-7065, and the 65-watt Pioneer SX-850. Let's get started. The Luxman R-1050 was rated at 55 watts and made between 1977 and 1979. At 55 watts, the R-1050 was the middle receiver in Luxman's three-receiver lineup that also included the 40-watt R-1040 and the 120-watt R-1120. Luxman was a higher-end brand, and you paid for it. This Luxman R-1050 retailed for $595, which is around $3,100 in today's money. Oof. For example, here are some retail prices of other 50 to 55 watt receivers from a 1978 buyer's guide. So I never really knew much about Luxman other than they were a luxury brand. And I think I just got that because they took part of the word luxury and stuck it inside their name. That's kind of ballsy. Just to remind us that they're luxurious, kind of like how Golden Grahams took the word graham, stuck it in their name, just to remind us that we're eating graham crackers for breakfast. Also, and I'm probably all alone on this, but I always confused Luxman and Rotel. I don't know why. Their names are nowhere similar to each other. Just a brain disorder on my part. So here we have the Luxman R-1050. I'm going to turn it on so you can see this nice little function it has. You're going to hear the relay click, and when the relay clicks, that light's going to go out. There. That lets you know that everything is fine inside. So if I back up, it looks like the only lights that are lit up are these two blue lights for the FM meters. But that actually is not the case. You can't tell because the overhead lights are on, but there are white lights in these corners, and they're so small and they're so just not well designed. I'm going to turn the lights out so you can see what I'm talking about. See, I told you there were lights in there. There's just one over here in the corner and one over here in the corner, and I have LEDs. They're white LEDs, and they shine up the best. Blue LEDs didn't shine up very well at all, and the white incandescents that were in there, they were even more pathetic. So I've left these to be blue just so you can tell that the thing is on during the daytime. So I'm gonna turn the lights back on so we can finish the functions. So what we have on it is 2 phono, 1 aux, and 2 tape inputs. All the tape inputs are handled with these little cheap plastic buttons. That was a bad move if you ask me. And the balance knob is this very cheap plastic knob. I don't know why they decided to do that. All these other functions are these little cheap buttons, instead of putting them down here with what would have been normal switches and knobs. The only other thing worth pointing out is it does have power meters, which are nice. It also has the ability, if you're listening at low volumes, you push this, and then they kick in at a much lower volume. If you're listening at high volumes, you just like that. That's a nice function. Anyhow, there is your Luxman R-1050. So here we have all three of them turned off. I got them turned off because I want to turn them on one at a time so you can see them light up. So I got the Sony on the top here, and it goes from being dark to being very nicely lit. And the Pioneer goes from this, ooh, nice. And the Luxman, by the way, I forgot to point out the Luxman's power button is on the right. Only the second unit I've ever noticed that on. My Marantz 2252B's got it on the right. Let's see what happens when I push it. Not as impressive. So I hate to keep harping on the looks of the Luxman, but it is just something I can't get past. It doesn't look near as good as the other ones. So I've talked about the Pioneer and the Sony in detail before, but I'm just going to hit on the highlights today. So some of the differences: the Sony has 3 speaker outputs. These other two, I just have 2. But the Sony only has 1 phono input. The Luxman and the Pioneer have 2 phono inputs. They all have 2 tape and 1 aux input. They all have signal and tuning meters. Some of the things that are unique to just them: the Sony has this switch I've talked about a few times before, where you can swap your left and right channels or send everything left or everything right. As we said, the Luxman has power meters. The others don't have power meters. But what the Pioneer does have are these switches down here to select the frequency at which the tone controls kick in, or you could just turn the tone controls completely on or completely off. So there we have today's 3 receivers. One more thing I forgot to mention are the weights of these. I'm going to put them on the screen. I've not looked them up, but I could pretty much tell you the Luxman is the lighter of the 3. That Pioneer is pretty hefty, and the Sony's no slouch either, but the Luxman did seem to be the lightest. So here we have the cases of all 3. 2 of them are real wood veneer, and then one is just fake wood laminate. Can you guess which one is the fake? Yep, it is the Luxman. So we do have the real wood on the Sony and the Pioneer. They are very nice cases, actually. So here we have the backs of all 3 of them. Let's start by looking at the speaker terminals, the most important thing on the back. And the winner today is the Pioneer SX850 with the push-button spring-loaded speaker terminals. I'm giving second place to the Luxman. I don't care for these near as much. And third place, you don't get much worse than just a bare screw head like the Sony has provided. The Sony did provide the ability to isolate the preamp from the power amp, flip that switch, access them there. The Luxman, nope. The Pioneer, yes, you get the ability there, pull those jumpers out. Also, the Pioneer has a protection relay in it. The Luxman has a protection relay in it. The Sony does not. It has a circuit breaker on the speaker terminals, so that will protect your unit if you short something out back there, but it won't really protect your speakers from high DC voltage on your speaker terminals like the protection relay will. And then the only other thing I'm going to point out is the Luxman doesn't have an AM antenna. I know no one cares about AM, but they did in 1975. It was an odd thing to leave off. So here we have all 3 of them with the cases off. I got the Pioneer on the right, the Sony in the middle, and the Luxman on the left. Let's look at their transformer and capacitors and the power supply. That's a normal size, pretty common size for the Luxman. The Sony's got a bigger transformer than the Luxman. Pay no attention to those capacitors. I replaced them, and the new ones you buy, of course, don't fit in the physical space and mounting of the old ones, so I epoxied them in there. The reason I replaced those and almost everything else in this was because it has a hiss that you hear if the volume is turned up and there's nothing playing. It has a slight hiss in the speakers, bothered me. I've replaced almost everything on the amp, or I should say preamp and power supply. Never got rid of it, still there. The Pioneer's got a pretty big transformer and really big capacitors. So kudos to you, Pioneer. Let's talk about the lights. Oh yeah, Pioneer also has awesome lights. That is a little socket. It twists, pops out. Put a new bulb in that socket, pop it back in, twist it in, takes 2 seconds. Very easy to replace lights in the Pioneer. On the Sony, the lights are on the ends. They're the fuse style. There's one on each end. I don't remember how hard it is to access. Let's just say average. And then the meter lights, I still have those as white. You pop that little board out, that looks pretty easy. Fuse style as well. And now the lights on the Luxman. The only lights you're going to see here on the Luxman are the ones on the meters. The ones for the ends, they're buried in there. They go through a grommet. You can't see them from here. You can see there's a third blue light that I just have dangling in there. That's because that was a light I had when I had blue ones on the ends. I just left that in there. Because basically you have to snip wires and solder all that in, every one of those lights. Way less than ideal. I did it 3 times, pain in the butt. There you have all 3 of them with the cases off. So as usual, I will stream the same song to 2 receivers at the same time, and then just switch the speakers back and forth using the remote control on a Duke audio switch. I don't listen to AM, FM, or a phono input, and I have all the controls just set on neutral. Oh, but loudness is on. So for this comparison, I use 3 songs. Modern Love by David Bowie, The Middle by Jimmy Eat World, and Mr. Brightside by The Killers. So the first comparison I did was between the Pioneer SX850 and the Luxman R-1050. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. I gave all 3 songs to the Luxman. And let me explain why. The Pioneer, to me, has maybe accentuated mids, and to me, they become a little harsh. Just to my ears, there's not distortion or anything, but it just isn't pleasant when turned up. At least not as pleasant as something like the Luxman. The Luxman is very smooth. And yeah, maybe it's got a little bit of a V curve, maybe where the highs and the lows are a little accentuated. but I like that. It sounds really good and punchy. And the 850 sounds okay, but it doesn't sound as good as the Luxman. For example, on Mr. Brightside, there is a kick drum that just punches you in the chest on the Luxman. It is really clear and punchy. No, not so much on the 850. It's there, but it's not very exciting. The Luxman, I really liked a lot better. All three songs to the Luxman. So next up, we have the Sony STR-7065 and the Pioneer SX-850. I'm giving all three songs to the Sony. And if you saw my other review, I did one other review about this with two other stereos, and I probably mentioned the bass in this thing. This Sony STR-7065, I'll say it again, has probably the deepest, most thumping bass out of any receiver I have. And that is saying something. So this thing goes super low. This thing doesn't go particularly low. So it's a pretty big difference. And the Sony's got a really wide soundstage. You flip to the Sony and everything just gets further apart. It's just better and funner. Funner is not a word my daughter would always tell me. But on a song like The Middle, the bass guitar, it's kind of there on the Pioneer, but man, the bass guitar on The Middle on the Sony just comes right through. You don't even have to try to hear it. It's just sitting right there. I will say on the song Mr. Brightside, they were a little closer, and I could see how somebody might prefer the 850 on Mr. Brightside for just how that song is. But not me, I'm not that person. I still liked it on the Sony. So all three songs Sony. And finally, we have the Sony STR-7065 and the Luxman R-1050. This one was much more difficult. These were very close, so close that I still kind of hesitate on who I'm going to give what song to. But I will say that the Sony is just a little deep. Well, the Sony is deeper. I don't know about a little. It is deeper than the Luxman. The Luxman's got really deep bass, and the Luxman's got a really good soundstage. And then you flip to the Sony, and it just gets even bigger. So the Sony kind of beats it in the soundstage, and it beats it in the bass. And for that, I'm going to give The Middle and Modern Love to the Sony. However, I will say that on the Luxman, it did a better job on Mr. Brightside, and it had to do with that kick drum. You listen to that kick drum and it sounds really tight and fast and defined and deep on the Luxman. And then you switch to the Sony and it gets deeper, but it doesn't stay as clear and as defined. And I like it clear and defined. It doesn't need to be that deep. So that kick drum, it sounded better on the Luxman. So I'm going to give Mr. Brightside to the Luxman, the other two to the Sony, but close on all three of them. So as always, I get a second opinion from my wife, Laura. She listened to them without knowing my opinion whatsoever. And when she listened to these two, the Luxman and the Pioneer, she was a little split. She thought Modern Love sounded better on the Luxman because she thought Modern Love was a little harsh on the 850, particularly with the piano part that just kind of stays in there. She thought that was a little too accentuated, didn't care for it. So she gave it to the Luxman. The next song in the middle, she thought they were different, but not one better than the other. So thought that was a wash. And then on the final song, Mr. Brightside, she gave that to the 850 for just having, she thought that was a song where you needed better, higher mids. Okay, whatever. So little torn here. But then on the Sony and the Pioneer, Sony all the way. She loved the bass. And then Sony and Luxman, Sony all the way. So it doesn't really matter, I guess, what she thought about those two. She thought the Sony was far and away the winner of all three of those. My hair sticking up. Whatever. It's only the internet. So quick summary here. The SX-850 compared to these two doesn't have the highs and the lows. It's got better mids, but with the rock music I'm listening to, it's not my cup of tea. So definitely I would say this was obviously third place. The Luxman and the Sony much closer to each other. The Sony first place, you know, they're stacked that way. So first, second, third, super deep bass, super fast, clear bass, better mids, maybe good for jazz. I don't know. Don't listen to jazz. Not knocking it or anything, but you know, maybe vocal music. But rock music, I would definitely go with one of those two. You want super deep bass. Can't beat the Sony STR-7065. So we need to end on value because sound isn't everything. Money plays a huge role in all our decisions. So here, let's look at some of the prices. You'll see that the Pioneer is going for twice of what the Sony is and about 3 times what the Luxman is. Now that is a lot of money. What you're going to get is you're going to get the Pioneer name, you're going to get fantastic looks, great build quality, some other things like the protection relay, easy to change out lights. But the reality is it doesn't sound as good as the other two. So if you just want the best sound for dollar, the clear winner on these prices is the Luxman. Yeah, the Luxman doesn't look as good, but man, when it comes to your ears and your wallet, I got to give it to the Luxman R-1050. There's your winner for value, definitely. Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time.